Good evening, you're watching Estuary TV News. Coming up, a bright future for Hull United as they dream of achieving the highest reaches of the game, and all aboard for a new initiative in rail transport on the east coast of England. And I'll be talking to two Hull authors who have written books on the past and on the future of the Labour Party. Welcome to Estuary TV News. I'm Hugh Riches. First of all, it's over to James Dunn for the news headlines.
Hello, in the headlines today, campaigners want budgets to tackle domestic violence protected, and shoppers in Cleethorpes face disruptions. But first, Energy Secretary Ed Davey was in Hull today to welcome the start of work on Europe's largest wind farm on Alexandra Dock. Siemens' £310 million investment in turbine manufacturing facilities promises to create 1,000 direct jobs in the production of 600 blades a year. Councillor Stephen Brady said it marks a historic day for the city and will be the biggest influence on the local economy for generations. The chair of the Police and Crime Panel has called for budgets to tackle domestic violence to be protected during force restructuring. Councillor John Everson says that domestic violence incidents are falling, but that the good work needs to continue as the force cuts more than £30 million by the 2018-19 financial year. A national expert spoke at a special meeting in Hull this week, and Police and Crime Commissioner Matthew Grove said restructuring won't affect their commitment to tackling the issue.
So this is just one of the things that we are very concerned about. We're doing very well as a region at the moment. The statistics have gone down from 4 in 1,000 to 3 in 1,000 point something or other, not particularly significant point. And because of the reorganisation of the police force, obviously we want to make sure that continues.
The country's top headache experts have descended upon Hull. The city is hosting discussions and meetings on groundbreaking treatments for the biennial British Association for the Study of Headaches conference. It's a chance to raise awareness about conditions such as migraines and cluster headaches, so sufferers seek help and healthcare professionals can better diagnose them.
We need to do this to make sure that patients receive accurate diagnosis, that we minimise the likelihood of them developing medication overuse or complications of not having the right treatments.
And finally, Cleethorpes' busiest shopping street is set for 12 weeks of disruptions starting in February. The resurfacing and drainage upgrades on St Peter's Avenue begin on the 9th and will involve some 24-hour road closures. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today, but I'll see you next time.
Wigan Athletic, Fulham, Crawley Town and Fleetwood Town, all Football League clubs that, in the not-so-distant past, were plying their trade in the lower echelons of the English game. Now the city of Hull could be on the brink of generating a new fairy tale.
When talking about sporting fairy tales, the city of Hull cannot be ignored. It took Hull City 104 years to reach from the lower leagues and play in the top flight, and there is hope in one corner of the city that a new legend may be added to the city's rich sporting tapestry. Hull United were formed just 6 months ago and are now competing in the Humber Premier League, the 11th tier of the pyramid, and they've now taken on 2 former Hull City stars, Curtis Woodhouse and Ian Ashby, to manage the side, all kick-started by social media.
So social media is a big tool, and I think Curtis expressed an interest, so I didn't find out till early hours Saturday morning that he was interested. He'd sent me a text and we had a meeting about it on the Saturday after the game, and basically said, well, we had obviously things we wanted to talk about and things that we'd like on board, but then I had the meeting with him on the Monday, so having met him for a few hours, it made an easy decision really.
And former Hull City skipper Ashby is impressed by the quality of some of the players.
There's levels everywhere, and some of these lads have been at semi-pro clubs and at professional clubs, so they understand it. They just might not have had the break. They might not have in their own personal lives things happen. So you've got to make that decision with each individuals and take it from there really. But there's a bit of quality here, yeah.
Unlike Ashby, Curtis Woodhouse does have previous management experience with Goole and the world's oldest club Sheffield FC. And let's not forget his spell as British light welterweight boxing champion. He wants to give the current players a chance, but is aware that going through the leagues will need new additions.
So far, I've only played one game, we won 4-1, so there's not too many negatives so far, but I'm sure, you know, any squad that gets promoted, you need to strengthen, but, you know, the lads that are in charge of the shirt, they'll look after it, and it's down to them, really. If they do the business, then we won't need that many players. If they don't, we will, so it's down to the boys that are already here.
Ian Ashby's title isn't just assistant manager, but player assistant, and the former Premier League captain isn't ruling out making a playing appearance.
Well, I've struggled with it this year, so I've not played a lot of football on it, so probably going to start to train towards the end of the season and then have a look at pre-season and see where I am there.
You're watching Estuary TV News. A little later in this programme, we'll make our usual canine inquiries in Dog of the Week, and Dan Kemp will bring you all the sports news. This year's general election will be unlike any in history because it'll be the first in which more than 2 or 3 main parties are real contenders for many seats, and no single party is likely to win an overall majority in Parliament. Historically, one of those main parties has been Labour, traditionally left-wing and working class, but reinvented in recent decades. My guests, Dermot Rathbone and Daniel Martin, have written about the history of the Labour Party and its future potential. Gentlemen, many thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
Your book's been written together, a collaboration through red lenses.
That's right.
Just tell me, give me a brief outline of what you put in here.
Well, the idea that we came up with is that we want to place the Labour Party in British political history and in contemporary times, so that people have a clear understanding of where the Labour Party came from and what its values are, and also the potential Labour Party has going forward if it identifies a vision for government in the future.
Yeah, sorry. The idea is that the argument is that the Labour Party really did have a role in making modern Britain what it is, made Britain great, and that the Labour Party can, if they can articulate a vision, can do that once again and overcome some of the perceived problems that the country has at the moment.
Well, it's subtitled, it was the Labour Party which made Britain great. That's working on the perhaps controversial premise that Britain is great.
Well, it's an interesting point. I think that what we failed to do, or what the country's failed to do in recent years, is to clearly identify what the issues are facing Britain, both in our domestic sense and in our position on the world stage. And what we seek to do in the book is to try and identify these issues and articulate some ideas about the way forward for the UK.
Daniel, how would you sum up the philosophy of the Labour Party? What is the ideological basis of Labour Party politics?
Well, the problem with the Labour Party is it's such a broad church. So you've got people who are very sort of working class, left wing, the trade union movement, through to the centre ground. It is what's called an internal coalition party technically. So we have many different, what might be separate political parties under one banner, and that gives the party a real strategic problem going forward. The beauty of it is it allows the party very easily to come to the centre ground. Then we also have to consider our core values as a party, especially when you're inside the Labour Party, because they're extremely important to the core membership. We are members of a party which is there to serve the interests of working people, to provide jobs, to make sure that everyone's got a quality job, to move away from what we have at the moment, which is a low-wage economy.
I should just interrupt you. Using the pronoun there is significant. Using the word we, I should emphasise that this is a book written by 2 Labour Party members and supporters.
Well, that's why we called it Through Red Lenses, because we are looking at things. It is a biased book, and we make we've got no qualms about that. It is a biased book, and we are putting forward the premise that Labour, as Danny said, it's a broad coalition, but that in some ways that provides great opportunity for creative opportunities in terms of policy making, and bringing it down to a sort of grassroots alliance of different ideas. And what we'd like to see is that grassroots alliance move policy upwards into the Parliamentary Labour Party and then hopefully into government, rather than having it sort of top down.
Could I just I'm trying oversimplifying massively, but I don't want to get into this philosophical route, this ideological distinction between the parties. So if I were to say that of the 2 great values of modern, since the 18th century political thinking, equality and liberty, that traditionally throughout the 20th century and the early 21st century, the Conservative Party has been more on the side of the idea of individual liberty, and the Labour Party on the side of state action to create equality, which of course means in some ways diminishing the liberty of some. Would that be a fair description of the two ideologies?
Well, the idea we have in the book is that traditionally there was liberalism and market liberalism, and across Europe and across the world as a whole, the idea of socialism was created to counter liberalism because it created great deprivation and poverty. The book begins with talking about the conditions in East London and the conditions in northern towns like York as well, where frankly it wasn't 100 years ago, it wasn't a pleasant place to live. And socialism, whatever breed it comes in, was born to counter that. And one of the big theories behind the book is that neoliberalism has reasserted itself as the dominant political force. We live in a capitalist society with increasing greater inequalities, especially low-wage economies, the gap between the rich and the poor, which is irrefutable. The real argument now is that socialism needs to reassert itself and become dominant once again.
Well, that's good. It's good to hear that rather nostalgic word. I haven't heard that for a long time, even among Labour Party circles. Dermot, you don't often hear Labour Party politicians at the moment using the word socialism.
I think if you talk to the members, you know, the ordinary people that make up the Labour Party, then many self-identify as socialists. I mean, we go door knocking on a regular basis in our communities on various campaigns that we're running, and you know, people do self-identify as socialists, and they believe in socialism as a good philosophy. You mentioned there that it was that socialism is about equality. I would say what the objective in any society hopefully should be to create equality of opportunity. You know, and that is certainly diminishing. You know,
that phrase, equality of opportunity, reminds me of a certain Margaret Thatcher. That was the sort of thing that she would say in the 1980s.
Well, in fact, the interesting thing is statistically, this country was at most equal, in inverted commas, in terms of the wealth gap and all the other indicators in 1976. Which, of course, was an era of a Labour government. That we'd had a Labour government from 1964, interrupted by 3.5 years of the Heath government. But Labour was in power in that period, and due to the work it did on social justice and things like greater recognition for trade unions, and in terms of collective bargaining for salaries and what have you, then the wealth gap narrowed. And there's a recent book called The Spirit Level, which talks about inequality, and it shows that where the countries with the greatest inequalities, such as the United States, such as Portugal, such as Singapore, these have the worst outcomes.
There's Daniel, Dermot's just mentioned the Labour governments of the 1960s and 1970s under Harold Wilson and James Callaghan. What would you say was the Labour Party's finest moment in power?
As a whole, or from the 1960s, I mean, if we talk about more recently, which is if we talk about modern politics, policies such as the minimum wage, which I know the Labour Party is going back to and sort of trying to give those at lowest pays a pay rise, as it were. These are the policies that we need to be, sort of talking about. I think when we look at our history as a political party, we need to look at the policies that we maybe had in the past and the problems that we have now. So we have a problem with affordability of the cost of living. We have a failing train network, and one of the arguments in the book is that maybe we should look at public sector ownership of the energy sector, or at very least a mixed hybrid system, and that's the same with the trains.
You put forward those policies, and again, we're all reflected in the past, but you sound very much like Clement Attlee. That sounds like the policies of the 1945 government.
A marvellous compliment, and I'd like to thank you for that. I think that's probably the best compliment I've ever had.
In that spirit.
If we talk about privatisation and the consequences, we look at the energy industry in the 1980s, and the government told us that if energy was broken up and privatised, that the idea of competition would mean that prices come down for the consumer. But we've seen
Adam Smith classical economics.
Yeah, but we've actually seen the opposite happen. And that we've now got a very narrow tranche of ownership of the energy industry, much of it offshore, and in fact prices have been driven up because it's consumer that is being squeezed, because capitalism works on the process of squeezing for profit. So therefore they squeeze the consumer. And we need to look at that as a template, and we've got to be very, very careful about things like private providers in National Health Service. Because the template from the energy industry in the 1980s shows us that when private providers are brought in to run public public utilities that it doesn't really work out very well.
Can I just try to get into this, the nature of British politics here and the spectrum of thought and philosophy and thinking that's gone behind it? Is not one of the sadnesses of current British politics that there's very little philosophical difference between the main parties? You've spoken of neoliberalism, you've spoken of socialism. Both main parties, or three main parties, want to have a state that accounts for about 43–45% of GDP.
Yeah.
That sort of mixed economy style thing. But there's no great ideological difference on the trivial details like fox hunting and things like that. That's not a philosophical difference. We don't really have much choice, do we? Any party we vote for, it's pretty much the same centre ground consensus ideology.
Well, I'd argue that when you look at your individual MPs, which is what we vote for, we don't have a presidential system, we don't vote for Ed Miliband or David Cameron. When you look at your individual parliamentary candidates in April and May, I believe the gap is a lot wider. And when you actually start really digging down into what they believe, I mean, if one of these politicians turns up on your doorstep, you must be asking them some tough questions. You know, there's never been a more important general election than this year, and it doesn't matter which party turns up, you must ask them tough questions, and then you'll see the divide between the centre ground parties, because the individual candidates, and it's of all parties, have deep-rooted
Forgive me,
views.
I'm going to have to end it there, but I love the idea of ending it on the point of asking politicians tough questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you for having us.
us.
More politics. We went onto the streets to ask if the voters have made any significant decisions.
I think we've got to get the economy right still, and it's progressing. And
work together as
work together. The country ought to just pull the socks up and think, right, we're going to be this better than anybody, let's get going.
They all promise much and deliver nothing. All jammed tomorrow. There's not a lot in the current economic crisis that they can do, because Europe's had it.
I think local elections, you know, because it's the person you voted for is going to represent the town the best. Like Austin Mitchell represented Grimsby, fantastic. And you've got to think of that really more.
I've got a party in mind.
And what's the sort of sticking issue that makes you go towards a particular party?
The trust element is the problem with the politicians. No one trusts them and no one believes a word they say, tell you the truth. And you feel like whoever you vote for is not going to benefit the working person anyway, so...
Absolutely not, no.
Is there a certain issue that sways you towards?
Pure laziness on my part. I don't really follow politics at all, and I know I ought to, but I don't follow.
Good transport links are essential for a strong economy, which is why yesterday North East Lincolnshire Council approved a plan to join a consortium of East Coast authorities campaigning to improve the rail network that serves the area. Membership will cost up to £5,000, but the council believes it's value for money if it can help secure a better rail network for the future. James Dunn has more.
Grimsby's economy is rapidly accelerating. Last year, investments into the renewables industry came at breakneck speed, but improvements in the rail network could be more of a long-haul journey.
Grimsby, over time, perhaps a little more slowly, depending on other bits of the jigsaw, how quickly renewables comes off, look at what's happened to the oil price lately, or in terms of developments around Able, how quickly inward investment comes in there. You get the momentum that will bring the volume of profit for the private company, but certainly as an infrastructure, as part of the chicken and egg process of economic development and growth, it's a key part that we value.
Last year, the direct service from Cleethorpes to Manchester was under threat, but since the Transport Secretary announced it was safe, the local council has been on a very different track. Now they're campaigning for 2 new direct services from Cleethorpes to London every hour, and they make a strong case with research on potential increase in GDP as a result of the service. Out of 100 local authorities, North East Lincolnshire was in the top 10.
Well, it's important because it will make Grimsby more vibrant in terms of an economic sense by having greater connections to London every 2 trips every hour. It makes it more accessible for investors to come to the area, for coming to meetings, and with all the growth of the renewable sector industries on the South Bank, it's never been more timely to have that direct connection to London.
Across the water, Hull City Council and the Chamber of Commerce have been lobbying for electrification of the line. They claim it's now a matter of when rather than if, which proves lobbying can work. But it's also evidence that there's competition.
The issue is there are other competitors who look at other areas that they may be able to service, and the Secretary of State and his ministers and civil servants have to take account of all the lobbying from all the areas and which adds the most value.
And now it's over to Dan Kemp with the sport.
Grimsby Town are out of the FA Trophy, having gone down 3-2 after extra time in Gateshead. The Mariners took the tie into the additional 30 minutes through Jack McCreth on 88 minutes, following on from Paddy McLaughlin's first half strike. But substitute John Shaw gave Gateshead the win to give them a place in round 3 and end Town's quest for silverware. Scunthorpe United are hoping to use our extended period between games to deal with their goalkeeper crisis. Both Sam Slocum and James Seven broke their arms during the first half of the Irons' 2-0 home defeat to Bristol City last weekend. And assistant boss Ned Kelly is hopeful it'll soon be resolved.
It gives us a bit of time to look. It gives us a little bit of time to go through the options. Gaffer's, the reason I'm talking to you is the Gaffer's currently trying to get something sorted out now. So, you know, we're looking. We're always looking. It's not as if it's been dropped on us because you know you look to improve the squad at all times.
Hull City have announced that their under-21 side will play at the KC Stadium directly after their next first-team fixture. The Tigers first are set to face Newcastle United in the Premier League on the 31st of the month, and that game will now be followed by the development squad game against Mansfield Town. The first team kick off at 12:45 and the youth will kick off at 2:50. The latter game is free admission. And finally, Market Racecourse host their Residence Day meeting on February the 3rd. It means there'll be free admission to the Tatterstall's enclosure for anyone in the LN, DN, NG or PE postcode areas on the day of racing with proof of address. And that's all for the sport.
Thanks, Dan. Here's your dog of the week.
294, Max, who's a lurcher, very lovely dog. A lot of people are put off by lurchers because I think they need a lot of exercise, but really they don't. They're just like a couch potato and they love to lay against the fire, and they do make a very loyal pet. So anybody wanting to give this dog a good home would like to hear from you.
That's all we have time for today, I'm afraid. If you have a story for us, please go to our Facebook or Twitter pages, details on the screen, email at estuary.tv or phone Grimsby 315561. From me, until tomorrow, good evening.
Hello and welcome to Estuary TV's weather. Bright for much of the day, but cloud will increase later with patchy rain, falling as snow on hills. A brisk southwesterly wind will develop, maximum temperatures of 3 degrees. Cloud and sunny on Saturday with occasional wintry showers on hills.